John is having a vision in our first reading from the esoteric book of Revelation. He makes us imagine God sending letters to 7 churches and dictating his messages to the angels assigned to look after these churches. Today, he is writing to 2 churches, Sardis and Laodicea, both located in the ancient Asia Minor, the modern-day Turkey. The one that is more closely related to the gospel today is the second letter, the one addressed to the church at Laodicea. It is almost a description of Zacchaeus in today's gospel reading before he encountered Jesus. Listen, the text says, "You think you are rich and affluent, and yet you do not realize that you are wretched, pathetic, poor, blind, naked. I advise you to buy from me gold that is refined by fire, so that you may be truly rich." And so why do I think that this describes Zacchaeus, the tax collector? Well, Luke tells us he was short in stature. I wonder if he meant that literally or figuratively, but actually it can apply in both senses. I'm inclined to believe that this man must have had enough of being bullied, ridiculed, or belittled because of his smallness, shortness, or his inadequacies. There comes a point, when a person who has been abused may develop a syndrome, especially if that person is unable to process the experience. In his desire to get even with the oppressors, he may end up turning oppressive himself, using his ingenuity to reinforce himself with the armor of power that could give him a sense of invincibility. Well, St. Luke gives us a good illustration in Zacchaeus. When he is unable to see Jesus passing by because he is short of stature and his view is blocked, he helps himself. He runs ahead and climbs a tree. And he has a good view. Mirador. The evangelist has a way of being both literal and figurative in the way he tells his story. He succeeds in picturing Zacchaeus to us as a man who has learned well how to assert himself, how to compete, how to prove his worth by treating life like a marathon. That it's just a matter of getting ahead of everybody else. That the challenge is really just about being skillful at running ahead of everybody else, of climbing and gaining a better vantage point. He seems to have learned very well the art of climbing, including social climbing. He reminds me of the girl whom Madonna sings about in her very famous song, The Material Girl. The song says, "Experience has made me rich, and now they're running after me because we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl." Zacchaeus must have turned into a material boy himself, an expert in social and economic climbing. Luke tells us that he became so good at it, he became the chief tax collector and a very wealthy man. But I think he was conscious of the fact that he was doing all of this by defrauding the poor and committing extortion. Well, I'd like to believe that an angel had visited him before this and spoken to him about Jesus. Could have been a friend. He may have been haunted by things people told him about Jesus of Nazareth, who had preached about things like, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his very self? You know, those are words that haunted Ignatius of Loyola himself. He may have heard of Jesus opening the eyes of the blind, making the lame walk again, seeking out the lost, and deep in his heart, Zacchaeus knew that he was one of them. Well, Luke tells us Zacchaeus longed to see what Jesus was like. He was probably curious to know, how come? How come this carpenter, who is a virtual nobody from Nazareth, is being looked up to by many people like he were a big man? How come this poor man from Nazareth seems like he had so much to offer, so much to give? Perhaps Zacchaeus had come to that point in his life where he suffered in silence and said to himself, here I am, very rich and powerful, but hated and looked down upon, ridiculed for my job. I wish I can see what the secret is from this man from Nazareth. I wish I can learn from him. And I wonder if he would pay any attention to someone like me. And so he used the same techniques that he had often used before, of trying to run ahead, of trying to climb whatever needs to be climbed in order to be in a position of advantage. But something he did not expect happened. Suddenly, the man he had been waiting for, the man he had been looking up to, stopped right where he was. And then he looked up at him. For the first time, somebody looked up at him. And perhaps even smiled at him and greeted him like a long-lost friend in order to tell him that he wanted to have dinner with him. I suspect that Zacchaeus must have held back for a while. He must be like that homeowner we hear about in our first reading, who is being invited to open the door, to welcome the Lord. We heard it. Here I am, knocking at your door. If you open up, I will enter and have supper with you. If you open up. That's still a big if. If you open up. And was Zacchaeus going to open up? Well, he decided to open up and to let Jesus in. And what an experience of liberation it had become for him. Suddenly, he was no longer feeling small. All he was being asked to do was to come down, to stop running ahead of everyone else, to stop stepping on others, to climb up much higher in the social ladder, to stop trying to prove himself. It was like the message I quoted from Isaiah a few days ago about how the prophet was able to conquer his own fear when he heard God saying to him, "You are precious in my sight. I have called you by your name, and you are mine." And so Zacchaeus learned from Jesus a new way of going up. The only way to go up is to come down. The way of kenosis, the way of finding fulfillment through self-emptying. You know, there is an old religious song that does not fail to strike a chord in people whose lives have been changed by their encounter with Jesus. And you're all familiar with that song, Amazing Grace. It is the kind of song that can bring tears to the eyes of a person like Zacchaeus. Remember, it says, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. To the Zacchaeuses in this world, I think the sound would really be amazing and unforgettable. The sound of grace said, "Come down, Zacchaeus." And he was never the same after he responded to the invitation. And I think he would look back and say, "I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see."
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. I was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. Oh, precious did that grace appear,